A season can come down to how good is your coach and how good is your quarterback. So with Jordan Love and Matt LaFleur, who's got it better than the Green Bay Packers right now?
You are Locked On Packers, your daily Green Bay Packers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Peter Bukowski, and I cover the Packers for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast to iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers, the number one Packers podcast on the internet, and the show for fans who know what happened. They want to know why and how. Thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. We hope you like starting your day with us as much as we like starting our day with you. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Matt LaFleur is one of the best coaches in the NFL. Jordan Love is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, or at least he was last season. Whatever you think he's going to be, that is what he was last year. And so often, a season will come down to those two things. How good is your coach and how good is your quarterback? And it does matter how good your quarterback makes the rest of your team, because injuries are going to happen. And it does matter how much your coach makes your quarterback better when we're trying to gauge someone like Brock Purdy, for example, or Tua Tagovailoa, for example. The coach makes the quarterback better. Does the quarterback make his teammates better? And I'm not talking about just better relative to Jimmy Garoppolo in the case of Brock Purdy. It is no question at all. The number one name on this list is the Kansas City Chiefs. They have Andy Reid, arguably the best coach in the league, and Patrick Mahomes, inarguably the best quarterback in the league. They are in a tier by themselves. But as you look around the league, I think you can start making the argument for Matt LaFleur and Jordan Love. So if we just take the quarterback conversation, okay, how many quarterbacks are ahead of Jordan Love right now? Let's just talk it out. All right, Josh Allen. Let's use Josh Allen. Sean McDermott has a lot to prove to me as a coach. I think he's a nice defensive coordinator, but even some of the weird anecdotes from our pal Ty Dunn aside, and they're not his anecdotes, they're Sean McDermott anecdotes. There have been some inglorious playoff exits and some really head-scratching decision-making in Buffalo. I'm not convinced Sean McDermott is one of the best coaches in the league. I'm not sure what his value add is in Buffalo, in part because he's Josh Allen. Okay? Lamar Jackson, reigning league MVP. Well, he's got John Harbaugh, who is one of the best coaches in the NFL. He is not your traditional guru, X's and O's scheme lord, but they've been to the Super Bowl, won a Super Bowl, reinvented the team, reworked it on the fly with Lamar Jackson. Now, he's had issues with staff turnover. They're seeing it again with this defensive staff. Mike McDonald headed out to Seattle, and a lot of those defensive assistants, Anthony Weaver and other guys, are now taking jobs elsewhere. How is that going to affect this team? And they have also, at least lately, had some inglorious playoff exits. That is the knock against Matt LaFleur, is they have not always lived up to what they could be, except in 2019, that team was, well, we'll get to Matt LaFleur. I don't want to preempt this. So, okay. Lamar Jackson and John Harbaugh belong in that next tier. Justin Herbert, let's just say. Well, Jim Harbaugh was a good coach, but has not been in the NFL in a decade. was a really good coach at Michigan, has won everywhere he's been. But one of the reasons things fell apart in San Francisco is that became a pissing contest over the credit, over whose offense it was, and it fell apart. So I'm not ready to put Harbaugh back immediately into that list. Just not. Joe Burrow, if you want to put him ahead of Jordan Love, I don't think much of Zach Taylor at all. I think he is a totally competent coach who happens to have Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. And he made a very good hire with Lou Anarumo. That's where it ends because they were not a good defense last year. Now that's in part the front office's problem, but it's a head coach problem too. Okay? We're running out of names here. Quarterbacks who are like clearly better at this point than Jordan Love. Dak Prescott, you want to put on that list? Mike McCarthy is not in this tier right now. Mike McCarthy, I still think is an underrated coach. Mike McCarthy and Dak Prescott probably belong in one of the top couple tiers after Mahomes and Andy Reid, but you would not rather have Dak Prescott and Mike McCarthy than Jordan Love and Matt LaFleur. You just wouldn't. So, okay. Tua and Mike McDaniel. Mike McDaniel, really good coach. Tua is you're not going to put ahead of Jordan Love. No, thank you. Jared Goff is not ahead of Jordan Love. No, thank you. I like Dan Campbell, but we'll see what he looks like without Ben Johnson as his offensive coordinator. Matthew Stafford, I thought he was really good last year. Matthew Stafford and Sean McVay, they won a Super Bowl together. They probably have to be in this tier. You probably have to put them in this conversation. But we're like working now to try and put this together. And so I think that tells you how few teams can really be in this conversation. To me, it's Reid and Mahomes at the top. Then it's McVay, Stafford, Love, LaFleur, and Lamar, Harbaugh in some order. If you want to say DeMeco Ryans and CJ Stroud, I understand. But we're talking about 1 year of CJ Stroud, and Jordan Love, I've done this before, was better than CJ Stroud last year. Everyone's very excited that CJ Stroud is the next great thing. Jordan Love was better last year. And for as much as I think DeMeco Ryans is a fantastic coach, you got to prove it beyond one season. So they can be in this conversation. I'm not saying that they are not worthy in terms of what I think their quality are, but they have not proven it at the same level. Matt LaFleur has proven it over and over. Now, multiple iterations of this team, multiple versions of this team, multiple quarterbacks, multiple types of team versus veteran versus young and rebuilding versus, competing and all those things. He has shown he is one of the best coaches in the league. Now, Jordan Love has not shown as much, but the coach has. So that matters in this conversation. And the one that I think if fans of the 49ers, for example, were to listen to this show, and they do, hi guys, they'll say Brock Purdy and Kyle Shanahan belong on this list, except we know Kyle Shanahan makes Brock Purdy. And we know that because Kyle Shanahan made Jimmy Garoppolo almost as good as Brock Purdy. So if the difference between what Brock Purdy was last year, when he was an outlier in terms of how good he will not be that good again this year. Not as efficient, not as explosive, not as lucky with turnovers. He's not the driver of the offense there, and we know that. If they lose Trent Williams for an extended period of time, if they lose George Kittle, or if George Kittle has to play hurt more often, if they lose Deebo Samuel, if they lose Christian McCaffrey, how does that offense function? It's going to throw a kink in the wheels there. If Jaden Reed goes down, the Packers can manage. If Christian Watson goes down, the Packers can manage. We saw them do it last year. Dontavian Wicks, Aaron Jones, David Bakhtiari. They did it. And still had one of the best offenses in the league. We've seen Jordan Love do it. We haven't seen Brock Purdy do it. We've seen Brock Purdy doing it under ideal conditions with the best play caller, play designer in the league. Okay, that's it. So I would put Brock Purdy and Kyle Shanahan in the next list. In the next tier, with Dak and Mike McCarthy, with Josh Allen and Sean McDermott. And maybe I'm being uncharitable to McDermott and Allen, and they belong in the tier above. But I'll also reiterate this with Josh Allen. What exactly has Josh Allen done in the postseason? I understand, got very unlucky against the Chiefs that his defense did not hold, but then there's also some pretty underwhelming performances at times. So, okay, show me. I think this tells me the Packers are in a terrific position right now to compete in the NFC, because I only named one other NFC team. That's McVay and Stafford. And at least the public perception is the Packers are the better team. Certainly the more talented defense. So if that's what they're up against, and we have the Shanahan Purdy thing to reckon with, this is one of the best 3 or 4 teams in the NFC, no question, and they are built to win in the postseason because of their coach and their quarterback combination. Now, there's a backup quarterback question to answer, and I want to answer it next on Locked On Packers. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Game Time is unleashing a ton of really cool new features like Game Time Picks that make getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. One of the big problems with finding tickets is, especially if you're in there early, you have a ton of options. It can be really hard to narrow it down. But Game Time Picks makes the process easy for you with curated deals to make it easier to find the best price on great seats. Curation makes everything easier, and it makes it easier to save money on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. Plus, get a panoramic view from your seat before you buy. Take the guesswork out of buying concert tickets, sports tickets, theater tickets, whatever it is with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, the lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you for making Locked On Packers your first listen. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast. Get daily insights on the best fantasy strategy so you can win your league this season. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We got reporting that the Cleveland Browns could be interested in moving Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who the Packers just saw in the preseason, in what I would say was an inauspicious performance from Dorian Thompson-Robinson. But he was terrific in last year's preseason, one of the reasons why he got 3 starts in the regular season when Deshaun Watson got hurt, did not cover himself in glory in those games. But they have Jameis Winston, they have Tyler Huntley, and they have, of course, the aforementioned Watson. And if you want to say, look, the Packers don't need to trade for Dorian Thompson-Robinson because if what they want is a veteran to win them some games, he didn't really prove he could do that on a team with an outstanding defense and a pretty good infrastructure. Amari Cooper and David Njoku, and even if the running game did not have Nick Chubb, that's still a running game that's set up to succeed. And an offense called by Kevin Stefanski that made Joe Flacco look like an NFL player again, which is remarkable. To me, there's more proof from him than either of the players that the Packers currently have behind Jordan Love. And I just think from a talent standpoint, I like the skill set. And that would be someone that I would rather, if you're going to bet on upside of someone like Michael Pratt, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, to me, has more physical attributes to work with and has more experience and played in the system or a version of the system, so he could already come in and hit the ground running. Plus, in that situation, he's QB4. What are you really going to demand? If you can get the Brett Hundley package for him, the 6th round pick or a 5th round pick swap, something like that, you do it. You do it. That makes sense. And you just say, Sean Clifford, vaya con Dios. And maybe you sneak him on the practice squad. But Dorian Thompson-Robinson, not the only option out there. In fact, there's a slew of options. And now we'll see if the Packers will actually need to make a trade. I think there are enough of these backups where there might not be trades on the market for some of these teams. They're just going to have to cut these guys, and the Packers can pick them up, at or around the start of the season. Taylor Heineke in Atlanta is another name to watch. He is someone who beat the Packers a couple years ago. We've seen him play some solid football in NFL games, meaningful games. He certainly has more experience than the guys that the Packers currently have. I think that would be the kind of move. Someone who, if you need to have them play 4 games, can they go 2-2? A little variance, create some high-level play. That's the problem that I see with the current group, is not only do they not have experience, but they just don't have that variability in the talent. Like if you bring Trey Lance in, and I don't know if Dallas is willing to move him with the uncertainty of Dak Prescott, there is a variability there where he could play well. There's a lot of talent. We're talking about the former number 3 overall pick, the running ability. Could he be some variance for you? I think he could. I think someone like Davis Mills in Houston, same thing. Zach Wilson even in Denver, who now seems firmly entrenched as QB3. I know Bo Nix is their guy now. Jared Stidham is a quality backup. Zach Wilson is a man without a country. Already played for Nathaniel Hackett. So he knows the offense, or at least pieces of the offense. And so that's a name. You're introducing variance. Yes, he was bad. He was bad on a team that was, fine in terms of the weapons, had Garrett Wilson. But there were also games where he looked okay. Outplayed CJ Stroud, by the way. There'd be some variance in there. Bailey Zappi in New England, that's one of those names where I don't know that there's enough potential variance there, and he doesn't have enough experience to make the experience worth it. There's not enough upside. That's why the DTR option is interesting to me. The rushing ability, the upside that brings you. Heineke to me is the name that I keep coming back to, though I really like the DTR opportunity there if the Browns are going to keep both Winston and Huntley. I'd rather have one of those guys. But I understand why the Browns would go, look, we had to play Joe Flacco last year. We made the playoffs with Joe Flacco last year. We're going to keep these guys. You can have the developmental guy. We're not looking to develop anybody. We don't think he's the future starter here, so whatever, it's fine. I can also see, even though he's, probably washed, Case Keenum is another quarterback in Houston. They have CJ Stroud. They have Davis Mills. Davis Mills would give you some variance. There were some games in Houston a couple years ago where Davis Mills looked like an NFL quarterback. And then there were times when he made, horrific decisions and plays, but that was also a team pretty bereft of receiver talent, of offensive line talent, of play calling talent. Someone like Davis Mills, you want to hit a play action shot play, he can do that. That would be another name that I would be interested in, but Keenum is the one that has the experience. If you wanted the experience, we're talking about a guy who, I know it's, 6-7 years ago now, but went to the NFC Championship game with the Minnesota Vikings. In a charm season, I understand we're talking about a journeyman player who has never really been a preferred starter, but he's not going to be a preferred starter in Green Bay either if that were to happen. It's something that I think makes sense for the Packers, and it's a group of players who, there's some names that are interesting to me. You could get one of Clifford or Pratt onto your practice squads and make a move for a player who, if you need them, can give you something this year. And then in a year, maybe you can move up your practice squad guy. Now, I do also understand the paradox here of, it's the old, you can't get a job without experience, but you can't get experience without a job. So if you just constantly cycle through these also ran quarterbacks, how are you ever developing somebody? It seems like what the Packers want to do is draft and develop backup quarterbacks the same way that they would draft and develop pass rushers, receivers, tackles, linebackers. that they're going to develop, draft and develop QB2s as well. The problem with that is if you need them before they're developed, you have a problem. And that's where the Packers find themselves right now. Is it a big problem? I don't know that it's a big problem. If Jordan Love plays 17 games, you're fine. If he plays 15 games, you're also probably fine. If he plays 12 games, now you might be in trouble. Now, I think if you're the Packers, you go, look, Matt LaFleur's under contract. Jordan Love is now under contract. We have the runway here to not worry about it. But also, what is it going to cost you? What is it going to cost you to go get Tyler Heineke? He's not a threat to Jordan Love. What is it going to cost you to go get Dorian Thompson-Robinson? A 6th round pick? That's worth it to me to give you a little bit of extra peace of mind. This is the most important position on the field. And the Packers need to be able to hold the fort in the event that they face injuries. So, go do it. I want to talk about the receivers in just a second here on Locked On Packers. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game, plus new customizable features. When the Packers aren't playing, you can be watching the Bears-Vikings game, and you can be watching the 49ers-Rams game, and you can be watching whatever other game you wanted because they're now making it easier for you to customize your watching experience. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. I have it. I love it. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you for making Locked On Packers your first listen. Now go listen to Locked On Fantasy Football. Get daily insights to the best fantasy draft strategies so you can win your league this season. You can find the link to Locked On Fantasy Football in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We've been doing a series of projections on our Locked On Packers Instagram, social medias. And the question was posed, who's going to lead the Packers in receiving? And I took that as an opportunity to have a little bit of fun. And I said, I think Jayden Reed is going to lead the Packers in catches. I think Christian Watson is going to lead the team in yards. I think Romeo Doubs is going to lead the team in touchdowns. And I think Dontavian Wicks is going to lead the team in ankles broken of opposing cornerbacks. And of course, that last one is a little tongue-in-cheek. But when you're trying to figure this out, and we talked a little bit about this a couple weeks ago when those crazy AI projections came out. But this is going to be a crowded receiver room all year if these guys can stay relatively healthy. And Bob McGinn always talks about this. You never really have too many guys. Someone is going to separate himself a little bit. Or that could be positive or negative, by the way. Someone is going to get hurt. That's just the nature of football. But I'm getting these questions about fantasy football. Any interview I do, national media, local media, doesn't matter. And then just like texts. I got a text from my brother-in-law the other day. Hey, so-and-so wants to know who is the Packers receiver to draft. And so I had to think about it. And it was a fun exercise for me to sit down and think about it. I'm not just going to I have a reputation that I'm trying to uphold around here. Some of you may think that I need to change it anyway. So the way that I see it is the only player of these receivers who is not really competing with anyone else at their specific spot on the field, it's Jayden Reed. And he set the rookie receiving record and had the most touchdowns, tied with Romeo Doubs because he's a running threat in the slot. This Packers team, they're going to play 11 personnel a ton. I think they're going to play some 11 where you have Jayden Reed a line in the backfield. I think they're going to play some 12 maybe where you have Jayden Reed a line in the backfield. Is it still 12? I don't know. Maybe. They're going to do interesting things with Reed. And so, to me, he's the safest bet to be the guy. Because Christian Watson he's going to be your deep guy. But Romeo Doubs can do some of those things too. And Dontavian Wicks got a lot of calls for him. Those deep over routes, those play action shot plays, dagger, Yankee, all of those classic Shanahan tree shot plays. They were calling a lot of those for Dontavian Wicks. And in a lot of those cases, Christian Watson is the guy like running the clear on those plays. He's drawing safety help. But he was also one of the most productive receivers per route run as a rookie with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. And he eats up man coverage. Anyone that wants to play this team in man coverage, good luck. Because Christian Watson is just going to run away from you. And his route running appears to be better this year as it seemed to get his physical stature in good stead with the hamstring and soft tissue injuries that they found at least a root cause, and they've worked on it. He's going to be your vertical receiver. So he might get 1,000 yards and have 60 catches. I mean, that's on the table for him. He doesn't need the targets. And that's why I think Christian Watson is the safe bet to lead the team in yards, because if he is healthy, that's a big if, but if he's healthy, he's not going to need the targets. Like, let's say Doubs, Reed, Wicks, and Watson all get similar target numbers, raw volume. Who is getting the deepest plays down the field? Who is getting the most potential yards in terms of air yards on their targets? It's going to be Christian Watson by a mile. So now teams they're going to try and play two deep safeties, and they're going to put a roof over everything. And then that's where Jaden Reed comes in. That's where Romeo Doubs comes in. That's where Dontavian Wicks comes in. But you still want Watson out there trying to attract that safety help. And then Romeo Doubs he's basically like their tight end. He really, I mean, if you look at the numbers, does not have a high, yard per carry average, but in the red zone, he's their guy. They're going to throw Romeo Doubs the ball. He's the guy they trust the most. And, Jair Alexander has been raving about the routes in camp. It seems like maybe he's taken another step forward, which would be really cool to see. He's someone who has I've been really high on his potential. Going back to Nevada before the Packers even drafted him, I thought he was, a late second, early third round talent. The fact that he fell as far as he did made no sense to me. I know that the injury probably played a role in all of that, but he was healthy enough to run and run well for scouts. So I'm not sure what happened there exactly. He's a really good football player, man. And if he just became the wide receiver one because Jordan Love trusts him the most, because Matt LaFleur trusts him the most, I would understand it. But then, you see in the Browns game, they called two plays, really. They wanted to get Christian Watson on a big post. Browns defended it well. Then they went slot fade with Dontavian Wicks. Those are going to be the two guys who I think get featured. And then you have your blanket. Romeo Doubs is Jordan Love's blankie. And so that's why it can be hard to parse some of these route numbers. And I didn't even mention in there Jaden Reed, but that's the thing is Jaden Reed can be on the field with Wicks and Doubs, or Wicks and Watson, or Doubs. And so the combinations are a bunch of guys. There's three guys for two spots and Jaden Reed. And they're going to be in 11 personnel probably 70% of the time. Is Romeo Doubs going to be in more than 70% of all sets? Two receiver and three receiver sets? Is Christian Watson? Is Dontavian Wicks? So I think just pure opportunity, routes run. I would be surprised if Jaden Reed does not lead the team in routes run. And last year, he and Dontavian Wicks had more than 2 yards per route run as rookies. One of the best figures in the league. He was highly efficient when he was on the field. If he takes a little bit of a step forward, we're talking about a potential 1,000-yard season. We're talking about a guy who can be a really, really, really good player. And the Packers have 4 guys that have that potential. It's pretty cool. All right, back tomorrow. Mike Renner, now at CBS, has a new podcast with Kyle Long. longtime Chicago Bear, not Chris Long. That's the green light. That's a different thing. But we're going to talk to him, Packers guy, formerly Pro Football Focus, now at CBS. So I'm excited for that conversation with Mike. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify. Wherever you find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers. And anytime you want to come hang out with us live, like we'll be Saturday after the game, go subscribe over on our YouTube page so you can stay Locked On Packers.